thought I had everything under control. I raised my son with love, sacrificed my own needs to make sure he had everything he wanted. But when I found out my daughter-in-law had stolen my credit card and spent $53,000 without my permission, my world shattered. Worse, when she sent me a mocking text calling me generous, I realized I wasn't just being betrayed, I was being played. For years, I had tried to win her over, but now I had to face the cold truth. I'd been a fool. How did I miss all the signs? And what was I going to do about it? This isn't just about money, it's about trust, family, and taking back control. Watch what happens next. Edith, a 65-year-old grandmother, had been eagerly anticipating her grandson Evan's graduation day. For weeks, she had planned everything carefully. She bought a new dress, selected a thoughtful gift, and even prepared a small speech to share with him. She had watched Evan grow up over the years, and this milestone in his life felt as significant to her as it did to him. To Edith, this was a chance to celebrate the young man Evan had become. But just hours before the ceremony, Edith received a call from her son, Peter, that would forever change how she viewed her family. "Mom, I don't think you should come to the graduation," Peter said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You know how Evan is. He's really into his friends right now, and he doesn't want you to embarrass him. You don't want to make things awkward, right?" Edith was silent for a moment. She had been looking forward to this day for months, and now it seemed as though her presence, the very thing she thought would bring joy, had become something to be avoided. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but inside her heart felt like it was breaking. Peter's words stung. They pierced through the years of love and sacrifice she had given to him and his family. Edith had always supported Peter, taking care of him when he was young, and later helping him with his children. She had been there for every birthday, every school play, and every hardship. Now, it seemed like all of that had amounted to nothing. As the call ended, Edith set the phone down with trembling hands. She had expected a warm welcome, perhaps even a hug from Evan as he walked across the stage, but instead, she was being told to stay away. The drive to the ceremony was quiet, save for the hum of the car's engine and the occasional passing of other vehicles. Edith stared out the window, lost in thought. Her mind replayed every moment she had spent with Evan, every moment she had watched him grow. She had attended all of his milestones, no matter how small, and now, at his graduation, she was being excluded. When she arrived at the venue, Edith took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The excitement of the day seemed to evaporate as she walked toward the entrance. She could see groups of students and parents milling around, excited chatter filling the air. Yet the closer she got to the doors, the heavier her heart felt. She had spent so many years being a part of these events, and now she felt like an outsider. Peter was waiting for her near the entrance, his expression unreadable. "Mom, just sit in the back. Don't try to get too much attention, okay? Let Evan have his moment," he said, his tone still polite but distant. Edith nodded silently, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She understood, but at that moment she felt as though her entire world had shifted. She had been reduced to a shadow in her own family. The ceremony began, and Edith sat quietly at the back of the hall, watching as the graduates took their turns walking across the stage. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for Evan. When he finally walked across, her heart swelled with pride. He looked so grown up, so poised. But then something unexpected happened. As Evan walked by, he didn't look toward the back of the hall where Edith sat. He didn't search for her face in the crowd, the face of the woman who had spent her life nurturing him. Instead, his eyes were fixed on his friends, his peers, and the excitement around him. Edith's heart sank. The empty seat beside her, once filled with hope, now felt like a symbol of her complete exclusion from his life. When the ceremony ended, Edith stayed in her seat, watching as the other families gathered to congratulate their children. She waited for Evan to come over, to offer her a smile or a hug, but he didn't. He was surrounded by his friends, chatting and laughing. Edith was left in the background, forgotten. Feeling a surge of hurt, she stood up and walked toward the exit. As she neared the door, she caught sight of Evan again. He was still with his friends, laughing and joking. His face lit up with joy, but there was no sign of her in his eyes. She had expected him to look over, to find her and acknowledge her presence, but he didn't. It was as if she had never existed. For a moment, Edith stood frozen, staring at her grandson from a distance. Her mind raced. She had given so much to her family, yet now she felt like a stranger in their lives. She turned and walked out of the hall, her steps heavy, as though the weight of years of sacrifice and love had suddenly become too much to bear. When Edith reached her car, she sank into the seat and let out a quiet sob. She had never imagined that the day she had looked forward to for so long would leave her feeling so empty. The pain of being excluded, of being invisible in the lives of those she loved, was almost too much to bear. But as she sat there in the car, Edith realized that this was not just about a graduation. This was about something much deeper. She had spent so many years living for others, sacrificing herself for her family, that she had forgotten to live for herself. Maybe this moment, this painful realization, was a wake-up call. Maybe it was time for her to take control of her own life. With one last look at the building, Edith started the car and drove away. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new. Edith sat on the edge of the small bed in the hotel room, the fabric of her new dress feeling oddly out of place on her. She had carefully chosen it for today, imagining how proud she would feel when she finally got to see Evan graduate. But now, the dress seemed more like a symbol of disappointment. She ran her fingers over the fabric, her mind replaying the events of the day. The ceremony had been everything she had hoped for, at least on the outside. The students looked happy, excited, full of potential, but there was one person missing in her mind: Evan. Her heart had ached when she saw him walk across the stage, not once looking for her, not once acknowledging the woman who had been there for him through it all. The silence had been deafening, and her presence at the back of the hall had felt like an afterthought, a mistake. She couldn't help but wonder if it had always been like this, and she just hadn't noticed before. Had Evan always been this distant, or had something shifted between them that she couldn't grasp? Sighing, Edith stood up and walked to the window, peering out at the busy street below. People walked by, laughing, chatting, living their lives, while she sat here alone, in a hotel room she hadn't intended to be in. She wasn't supposed to be alone today. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, forgotten and discarded. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Edith turned, startled. She hadn't expected anyone to visit her. She wiped her face, quickly dabbing away the tears that had started to gather in her eyes, and went to open the door. Standing in front of her was a young woman, smiling brightly, holding a small box in her hands. Edith took a step back, surprised by the stranger's sudden appearance. "Good evening, ma'am," the woman said cheerfully. "I'm here to deliver a gift from one of the other graduates' families. They sent these cupcakes for you as a congratulations." Edith glanced at the box the woman was holding. The words "congratulations" were written in colorful icing across the top of the cupcakes, and they seemed so out of place in that moment. The vibrant colors, the cheerful message, it all felt like a mockery to her. She couldn't help but feel that the gift was meant for someone else, someone who truly deserved to be celebrated. I'm sorry," Edith stammered. Who are they from?" "Oh, just a small gesture from the family of one of the graduates," the woman replied, her smile never faltering. "They thought you might enjoy it, given the special occasion." Edith looked at the cupcakes again, but her hands felt frozen. The thought of accepting the gift felt so hollow. She had no one to share it with, no one to laugh with about the colorful frosting or the cute decorations. She was alone in this hotel room, alone in the world. The idea of being congratulated felt foreign, even though she had always been there for her family, cheering them on through all their milestones. "Would you like to accept them, ma'am?" the woman asked, sensing Edith's hesitation. Edith looked down at the cupcakes, the sweetness of the gift seeming to clash with the bitter taste in her mouth. She wanted to say no, to send the stranger away, to tell her that she didn't need these empty gestures. But she found herself nodding anyway, unable to turn away the kindness. however misplaced it seemed. "Thank you," Edith said softly, her voice shaky as she took the box from the woman's hands. The stranger smiled again, and Edith closed the door quietly after her, feeling more isolated than before. Sitting back on the edge of the bed, Edith stared at the box in her hands. She hadn't even opened it, but the sight of the cupcakes only served to deepen the emptiness inside her. The message on the box, "Congratulations," felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had been excluded from. What was she celebrating? The end of a chapter in her life that she wasn't even invited to? The truth was that she had spent so many years giving herself to her family, her son, and her grandson, only to be dismissed at the first sign of discomfort. She opened the box slowly, her hands trembling. The cupcakes looked so perfect, their icing bright and inviting, and for a moment Edith felt a flicker of longing for a time when things had been different, when her family had been whole and she had been part of it. But that was gone now. She was no longer the center of their world, no longer the one they could turn to. The reality of that hit her hard. Edith took one of the cupcakes and held it in her hand. She didn't want it. She didn't want any of it. But it wasn't about the food, was it? It was about the acknowledgement, the recognition she had hoped to receive today, the recognition that never came. Taking a deep breath, Edith closed the box and placed it on the table beside her. The gesture, though kind, was a reminder of her isolation. She looked around the room, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. She had imagined today so differently. She had imagined Evan running up to her after the ceremony, his arms wide, ready for a hug, a moment of joy they could share together. But that was never going to happen. The dream had been shattered, and all that was left was this empty room, this empty feeling inside her. As the minutes passed, Edith felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. She was alone. She had been forgotten. The people she loved the most, her son and grandson, had left her out in the cold, and she couldn't help but wonder if it was her fault. Had she done something wrong? Had she asked for too much? The answers, of course, didn't come. There were no words that could make her feel better. All Edith could do was sit in this hotel room and wonder when, if ever, her family would see her again. Edith sat in the small, dimly lit hotel room, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. The quiet hum of the air conditioner was the only sound breaking the silence. She had been alone for hours now, but her mind refused to stop racing. The loneliness felt suffocating, but it wasn't just the solitude that bothered her. It was the crushing realization that everything she had done for her son, Peter, had been taken for granted. As she sat on the edge of the bed, Edith's thoughts drifted back to the early days of her motherhood. She remembered the sleepless nights when Peter was a baby, when she would rock him to sleep in the creaky, old rocking chair, her arms aching but her heart full. She had done everything for him, and she had done it with love. She stayed up late, working on her sewing machine to bring in extra money, all while caring for Peter, making sure he had everything he needed. Edith had been there for every scraped knee, every school recital, and every birthday. She had been the one to pick him up when he fell and the one to cheer the loudest when he succeeded. Edith smiled softly as she remembered those moments, remembering the bond they shared. But now, that bond felt like a distant memory. Her mind began to replay the moments leading up to today. Peter's cold words, his refusal to allow her to attend Evan's graduation. The sting of his rejection felt fresh, as though it had just happened. She had given him everything, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that none of it had mattered. For years, she had made sacrifices for Peter and his family. She had helped with their finances, loaning them money when things got tough, and even putting aside her own dreams to support their needs. She thought that her love and devotion would be enough to secure a place in their lives. But now, sitting in this hotel room, Edith realized that her sacrifices had never been truly valued. The thought gnawed at her, and she stood up, pacing the small room. She needed to do something to make sense of all of this. As she wandered around the space, her eyes fell on an old leather-bound box on the dresser. It was the box where she kept important papers, photos, and mementos from her life with Peter. Curious, she opened it, the worn lid creaking as she lifted it. Inside, there were a few old letters, some receipts, and a small stack of photos. But one letter in particular caught her eye. It was from Peter, written when he was a young boy. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was childish, but the words were clear. "Dear Mom, I know you work hard to take care of me, but I need your help. There's this business opportunity I found, and I think it could make us a lot of money. I'm just a kid, but I think this is the right move. If you could help me invest in this project, we'll both be rich someday. Please say yes. I'll work hard to make you proud." Edith's heart sank as she read the letter. She had completely forgotten about it, but now it came rushing back. Peter had always been ambitious, always thinking about the future. At the time, she had believed in him, thinking that he would grow up to be someone successful. She had even made some sacrifices to help him with his ventures, even though it hadn't been easy. She had borrowed money, cut back on her own expenses, and given him what she could to help him pursue his dreams. But now, as Edith sat there holding the letter in her hands, she felt a pang of regret. She had been so eager to support Peter's dreams, but where had it gotten her? She had spent years investing in him, both emotionally and financially, only to be left feeling discarded and unimportant. Edith pushed the letter aside and began flipping through the receipts in the box, each one a small reminder of the sacrifices she had made for her son. She had taken out loans for him, helped pay off his debts, and even sent money for his children when things got tight. But no matter how much she had given, it never seemed like enough. Peter always wanted more, and no matter how much Edith gave, she always felt like she was falling short. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Peter had never appreciated what she had done for him. She had poured her heart and soul into supporting him, but he had never truly seen it. He had never acknowledged the sacrifices she made, and now he was too busy to even acknowledge her presence at Evan's graduation. And then another thought crossed her mind. Min, her grandson. She had been saving money for years to help him with his future, to ensure that he had a better life. But as she thought about it, she realized that Min didn't even know about the money she had put aside for him. He had never once asked her about it. It was as if he had taken her sacrifices for granted as well, just like Peter had. It all felt so pointless now. Edith had given so much, yet it seemed like none of it mattered. She had tried to be a good mother, a good grandmother, and a good person, but all she had received in return was indifference. Her efforts had been wasted, and the love she had given was never returned in the way she had hoped. As the weight of it all settled in, Edith couldn't hold back the tears any longer. She let the letter slip from her hands as the tears flowed freely down her cheeks. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained. How had things gone so wrong? How had her family turned away from her when all she had ever done was love them? For the first time in a long time, Edith felt lost. The world she had built for herself around her family had crumbled, leaving her with nothing but an empty hotel room and the harsh reality of what had happened. But amidst the tears and the sorrow, a small flicker of clarity began to emerge. Edith realized that she had been living for everyone else, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her family. She had lost herself in the process. Maybe it was time to stop giving so much. Maybe it was time to start living for herself, to stop trying to please people who would never see her worth. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. But Edith knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living this way. It was time to make a change. Edith sat at the small desk in her hotel room, the weight of the morning's discoveries still heavy on her chest. She had spent years supporting Peter, her only son, with her time, energy, and resources. Yet now, it felt like it had all been for nothing. The realization that her sacrifices had been taken for granted was both painful and freeing. She could no longer continue to allow herself to be the one who gave and gave without receiving anything in return. After the emotional turmoil of the past few days, Edith decided it was time to take control of her life once again. It was time for a change. She stood up, walked over to the dresser, and opened the drawer where she had kept all the documents relating to the money she had given to Peter over the years: loans, gifts, funds for his children, and contributions to his failed ventures. There, in a neat stack, were the receipts and bank statements, all documenting her financial sacrifices. But instead of feeling regret, Edith felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. She had allowed Peter to drain her emotionally and financially, but now she was going to take her power back. She made up her mind to stop. No more money. No more endless loans or promises to help him out of his messes. It was time to stop being his crutch. Without hesitation, Edith began writing checks to return the money she had loaned Peter over the years. It wasn't about the money. It was about her reclaiming her dignity. She included a short note with each check, explaining that she was no longer able or willing to continue to support him. The last check she wrote was for the final amount she had been saving for Evan's education, money that she had hoped to give him to help with his future. She wrote across the memo line, "No more sacrifices." As she sealed the envelopes, Edith couldn't help but feel a sense of release. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She no longer had to worry about Peter's next crisis, his next request for money. She no longer had to feel guilty for saying no. She had been living for others for so long, but now, for the first time in years, she was living for herself. But she knew she couldn't stop there. The feeling of freedom was exhilarating, but it also felt empty. She couldn't let this moment of clarity fade away. Edith needed to take that energy and turn it into something meaningful. She had so much love and support to give, but it had been misplaced for far too long. She had to redirect it. That was when the idea hit her. She would start a scholarship fund, something to help students who had been overlooked, students like herself. She had seen so many bright, capable young people who never had the opportunities they deserved, who had to fight for every step forward. Edith knew that those who had been neglected, who had been told they weren't good enough, needed someone to believe in them. She would be that someone. Determined, Edith made some calls to local foundations and organizations, seeking advice on how to set up the fund. She spent the next few days researching, drafting a plan, and putting together the structure. It was something she could pour her heart into, something that would allow her to leave a lasting legacy. And, most importantly, it would keep her moving forward, away from the past and toward a future that was hers to shape. Edith's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She stood up quickly, surprised. She hadn't expected any visitors. When she opened the door, she was greeted by a young woman with a warm smile. "Grandma Edith," the woman said, her voice filled with excitement. It took Edith a moment to recognize her. "Mai?" Edith asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Mai, her granddaughter, had grown up so much since the last time they saw each other. The young girl she remembered was now a woman, standing in front of her with a look of admiration in her eyes. Mai smiled warmly. "It's me, Grandma. I've missed you so much." She stepped forward and embraced Edith, who stood frozen for a moment, taken aback by the sudden rush of emotions. It had been years since they last saw each other, and Edith had forgotten how much she missed this connection. Mai stepped back, looking at her grandmother with admiration. "I heard about everything that's been going on. I just wanted to check in on you and see how you're doing." Edith smiled softly, grateful for Mai's kindness. "I'm doing better than I have in a long time," she said, her voice more confident than before. "I've made some decisions about my life, and I'm moving forward." Mai raised an eyebrow, curious. "What kind of decisions?" Edith looked at her granddaughter, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm going to start a scholarship fund for students who don't get the opportunities they deserve. People like me, people who've been overlooked. I want to make sure they get a chance to succeed." Mai's eyes widened, and she beamed at Edith. "That's amazing, Grandma. I think that's exactly what you should be doing. You've always been so strong, and now you're turning that strength into something beautiful." Edith's heart warmed at the words. It had been so long since anyone had told her she was strong, that she had value, and here, in front of her, was her granddaughter, telling her that she was an inspiration. Edith realized in that moment that the love she had given over the years had not been in vain. She had done good things, even if those things hadn't been fully appreciated by her son or grandson. She had always been there for them, even if they hadn't recognized it. But now, she was doing something for herself, and she was proud of it. Mai took Edith's hands in hers. "You're my role model, Grandma. You've always been the strongest woman I know." Edith smiled through the tears that welled up in her eyes. "Thank you, Mai. You don't know how much that means to me." As they sat together catching up and sharing stories, Edith realized that she was no longer defined by her family's expectations or their indifference. She was building something that mattered, something that would make a difference in the world. And for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Edith sat at the small desk in her hotel room, the papers spread out before her. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm orange glow across the walls. But inside, she felt a chill. It had been a week since she decided to take control of her life, to stop allowing her family to define her worth. And although her decision had brought her a sense of clarity, it had also left her with questions she hadn't expected. She no longer wanted to be the person who existed in the shadows, waiting for recognition or validation from others. She had spent so many years living in the background, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her family, especially Peter. But no more. She was done. Edith had always prided herself on being a hard-working, dedicated mother, but now she needed to be something else, someone who lived for herself. The scholarship fund she had begun was a first step toward that future, and it filled her with purpose. She could still make a difference, even if it wasn't in the way she had always imagined. As she sifted through the stack of papers, Edith found herself thinking back to her own childhood. She had always dreamed of a life full of adventure, of seeing the world beyond her small town, of doing something meaningful. But those dreams had been put on hold as she became a mother and wife, as she worked tirelessly to support her family. And now, at 65, she was ready to pick up the pieces of her own forgotten dreams. With newfound determination, Edith began to make plans for her future. She researched opportunities to travel, to learn new skills, and to find a community where she could contribute. She wanted to leave behind the past, not forget it, but to stop letting it define who she was. But as Edith sorted through more papers, she came across something unexpected, a letter from her bank. It was addressed to her and Peter, and it was marked important. Confused, she opened it. The letter revealed information about a bank account she didn't remember. It was an old joint account, opened when Peter was just a child, and the statement showed a substantial balance. She sat back, stunned. This was a surprise. She had always handled the finances for the family, so why hadn't Peter ever mentioned this account? Edith's mind raced. She had always done everything for Peter, everything from paying for his education to helping him get a start in life. But this account, this money, had always been a mystery to her. She didn't know why Peter had never mentioned it, or why she had never noticed it before. Had Peter forgotten about it, or had he hidden it from her? As she continued reading the statement, Edith's confusion deepened. The account had been opened in her name, but it had only ever been used for one purpose, to hold funds Peter had received as a child. Edith had deposited money into it for years, saving it for his future, money that had accumulated without her ever being aware of it. A wave of anger and betrayal washed over Edith. All those years of sacrificing, of giving everything she had to Peter, and yet he had never once mentioned this account to her. She had poured her heart and soul into caring for him, into making sure he had everything he needed, and yet he had kept this account a secret from her, hidden away as if she were not worth the truth. Her hands trembled as she held the bank statement. Edith thought about all the times she had worked late, all the times she had gone without, all the things she had done for Peter to ensure he had a better life. And now, she realized that even in his childhood, he had been given a financial safety net she had never been told about, a safety net that she had unknowingly provided. She closed her eyes and let out a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotion swirling within her. This was the final straw. Peter's actions had taken her to the breaking point, and now she had to decide what to do with this newfound information. She couldn't let him continue to take advantage of her. She couldn't keep giving when she had nothing left to give. Edith knew that this discovery marked the beginning of her new life, the life she had been fighting for. She couldn't change the past, but she could certainly control her future. She had to let go of the idea that Peter would ever truly appreciate her sacrifices. She had to stop being his enabler, stop believing that her love for him was enough to make him change. With a sense of finality, Edith took the bank statement and tore it into pieces. She could no longer keep the secrets of the past hidden. It was time to reclaim her life, her dignity, and her future. Peter had made his choices, and now it was time for her to make hers. She stood up, taking a deep breath. The room seemed a little brighter now, the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders. Edith knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she had the strength to face it. She had been through so much already. This was just another step forward. As Edith looked out the window at the city skyline, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control. She was no longer a woman defined by the expectations of her family. She was a woman who would create her own destiny. Edith smiled to herself, the warmth of hope filling her chest. She had always believed in her son, in her family, but now she was going to believe in herself. Edith sat at her small desk, the paperwork neatly arranged before her. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. No longer weighed down by the years of sacrifice and quiet suffering, she was ready to make a decision that would reshape her life. It wasn't just about the money. She had enough of that in her bank account, hidden away in the shadows of her family's neglect. It was about her own freedom, her own chance to finally live for herself. The discovery of the bank account had been the catalyst for change. That small, long-forgotten account, which Peter had never mentioned, was a symbol of everything Edith had done for him, everything she had given up for the sake of her family. The time had come to use that money for something bigger than herself. She would take that money, which had been used to fund Peter's dreams, and turn it into a gift for young students who were struggling, who needed a chance to prove their worth, a chance she had never had. With a decisive breath, Edith picked up the phone and called the bank. She instructed them to transfer the full amount from the account into a new foundation she was starting, the Edith Foster Scholarship Fund. The fund would be used to help students from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue higher education. It was a decision that filled her with both purpose and pride. As she hung up the phone, Edith's heart raced. She had made a choice that was entirely her own, a choice that would impact countless lives. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of control over her destiny. But even as the excitement surged, a quiet thought began to creep into her mind. How long had it been since she had done something purely for herself? How many years had she spent living for others, sacrificing her own needs and desires? She had poured so much into her family, into Peter and Evan, and yet she had forgotten to care for herself. The realization hit her hard, and Edith paused for a moment, staring at the empty space in front of her. She had been so focused on providing for her son, ensuring his future, and then supporting her grandson, that she had never considered her own future. Her own dreams had been silenced under the weight of responsibility, and now, for the first time, she recognized the extent of her own neglect. She had sacrificed everything, her time, her money, her dreams, believing that if she gave enough, her family would see her worth. But instead, they had taken it all for granted. She had been so busy taking care of everyone else that she had forgotten to take care of herself. Edith had allowed herself to become invisible, lost in the roles she played as mother, grandmother, and caregiver. But that was over now. This scholarship fund was her chance to change that. It wasn't just about helping others, it was about acknowledging her own worth. By creating the fund, Edith was taking a stand for herself. She wasn't just giving for the sake of giving. She was choosing to invest in something that mattered to her, something that aligned with her own values and vision for the future. As she sat back in her chair, Edith felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For so long, she had been living under the shadow of her family's expectations. But now she was stepping into the light. She was making her own path, one that was not defined by her family's needs or their indifference, but by her own desires and goals. This scholarship fund was a manifestation of her new identity, a woman who was not afraid to put herself first, to live for herself. The more Edith thought about it, the more she realized just how important this decision was. She had spent so many years quietly sacrificing, never asking for anything in return. But now, at 65, she was finally giving something to herself. This wasn't just a financial investment. It was an investment in her soul, in her future, and in her ability to make a difference in the world. It was her legacy, not tied to her family, but to the students who would benefit from her generosity. As the sun began to set outside the window, casting a golden light over the city, Edith felt a surge of hope rise within her soul. She wasn't just a woman who had been forgotten. She was a woman who was choosing to reclaim her power. The scholarship fund was just the beginning. Edith knew there was so much more she could do, so much more she could give. This was her moment of rebirth. For the first time in years, Edith felt free. There was no more fear of rejection, no more worry about what Peter would think or how her family would react. She had done something for herself, and it felt liberating. It was as if she had finally stepped out from under the weight of everyone else's expectations and into her own light. Edith stood up, her eyes shining with newfound determination. She walked over to the small window, looking out at the world beyond. She could see the city bustling with life, people coming and going, living their own stories. She felt like she was part of that world now, no longer an observer from the sidelines. She was in the game, and this time she was playing by her own rules. As she turned away from the window, Edith smiled. This was only the beginning of her journey. She had made a decision to live for herself, to stop being the one who always gave and never received. She had finally found her voice, her purpose, and her path forward. The phone buzzed on her desk. It was a confirmation email for the scholarship fund she had just set up. Edith clicked open the message, her heart swelling with pride as she read the words. The fund was officially established. "Here it is," she whispered to herself. "My new beginning." With that, Edith sat back in her chair, feeling more alive than she had in years. She was no longer the woman who existed in the background, waiting for validation. She was a woman who had taken control of her life, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her. It had been a long time since Edith had allowed herself the luxury of reminiscing about the past. The years of raising her family, taking care of others, and sacrificing her own happiness had pushed all of that aside. But today was different. Edith had made a decision to embrace the future, to take control of her life, and part of that meant reconnecting with the people from her past. She had heard that an old friend from her youth, Lily, was in town, and after much consideration, Edith decided to reach out. It had been decades since they had last spoken, and Edith had always wondered what had become of Lily. Back then, they were inseparable, partners in crime, sharing secrets, laughing together, and dreaming of the future. But life had pulled them in different directions, and somewhere along the way, they lost touch. The meeting was set for a small cafe downtown, a place Edith used to visit with Lily when they were young. The thought of seeing her old friend again brought back a rush of memories, some sweet, some bitter, but all of them reminding her of the woman she had once been, before motherhood, before the years of quiet sacrifice. As Edith walked into the cafe, she scanned the room, her heart racing with anticipation. She spotted Lily immediately, sitting by the window, looking as lively as ever, her silver hair a testament to the years that had passed, but not diminished her spirit. "Lily?" Edith called softly, and Lily looked up, her face lighting up with recognition. "Edith!" Lily exclaimed, standing up quickly and pulling her into a warm embrace. "I can't believe it's you after all these years." Edith smiled, her eyes welling up with emotion. I know, it feels like a lifetime. They sat down at the table, and for a while, they caught up on the basics. How Lily had spent her years traveling the world, living a life full of adventure and passion, while Edith had stayed in the same town, raising her family. Edith listened intently as Lily described her experiences, the places she had seen, and the people she had met. It was a world Edith had never known, a world that had always seemed out of reach. Lily noticed Edith's wistful expression and smiled knowingly. You know, you were always the one who dreamed so big, Edith. You had such fire in you when we were younger. Edith laughed softly, though there was a hint of sadness in her voice. I used to dream of traveling the world, seeing new places, living a life of freedom. But then, I got busy, family, work, taking care of others. It was like my dreams just faded away. Lily nodded, her face becoming more serious. I know, Edith. I've seen that happen to so many people. You spent your life taking care of others, giving everything you had, but you never stopped to ask yourself what you wanted. You never stopped to think about your own happiness. Edith shifted in her seat, feeling a sudden wave of guilt wash over her. I had to take care of them. Peter, Evan, they needed me. I couldn't just think about myself. Lily's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, taking Edith's hand in hers. But that's just it, Edith. You gave, and somewhere along the way you lost yourself. You didn't do it for you. You did it because you thought that's what you were supposed to do. You've spent so many years sacrificing, but at some point you have to stop and ask yourself, when is it my turn? Edith stared at Lily, the weight of her words sinking in. She had always believed that her purpose was to take care of others. She had done it out of love, out of duty, but also out of habit. It was what she had always done. But now, as she looked into Lily's eyes, she wondered if that was enough. Had she been so focused on everyone else's happiness that she had forgotten to live her own life? Lily leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. I've traveled the world, Edith. I've seen the beauty of different cultures. I've made memories with strangers who became friends, and I've learned so much about myself along the way. But none of it would have mattered if I hadn't learned how to love myself first. You can't keep giving to others if you don't have anything left to give. You have to take care of yourself, too. Edith felt a lump form in her throat. The truth of Lily's words was undeniable. She had spent so much time taking care of everyone else, her son, her grandson, her family, but in doing so, she had neglected herself. She had never stopped to think about her own dreams, her own desires. She had let her life be defined by the roles others expected her to play. I don't know if I know how to do that, Edith said quietly. I don't know how to just live for myself. Lily smiled gently. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. It's a journey, Edith. You've already taken the first step. The fact that you're even having this conversation with yourself means you're ready. You just need to give yourself permission to dream again. Permission to be who you truly are, not just who everyone expects you to be. Edith's heart swelled with emotion. For so long, she had put everyone else's needs ahead of her own. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she had permission to live for herself. She wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but she knew she was ready to start. They spent the next few hours reminiscing, laughing about old times and sharing stories about their lives since they had last seen each other. As Edith listened to Lily's tales of travel and self-discovery, she felt a flicker of excitement for the first time in years. Maybe it was time for her to start her own adventure, to finally see the world beyond the confines of her small town and her family's expectations. When they said goodbye later that afternoon, Edith hugged Lily tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping me see what I've been missing." Lily smiled and patted her hand. "You're welcome, my dear. Now go live for you. The world is waiting." Edith sat quietly by the window of her small apartment, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the world outside. It had been a few weeks since she made the decision to take control of her life. She had made the choice to finally start living for herself, to begin dreaming again, and to stop worrying about what everyone else expected of her. For the first time in years, she felt peaceful. The quiet hum of the city outside her window, the soft rustle of leaves in the trees, and the warm sunlight pouring in all seemed to remind her that life was still beautiful, still full of possibilities. She had started to reconnect with old friends, enrolled in a few courses at a local community center, and even began visiting nearby museums and parks. Places she had always wanted to explore but never had the time for. Edith had found herself rediscovering the small joys of life, things she had put aside for so long while she cared for others. She spent her mornings reading books she had once loved, her afternoons taking walks in the sunshine, and her evenings writing in her journal. The weight of the past had lifted, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose, as though she was finally free to be the person she had always wanted to be. But just when things seemed to be falling into place, the phone rang. Edith's heart skipped a beat as she saw the caller ID. It was Peter. She hadn't heard from him since she had returned all the money she had given him. Her initial reaction was to ignore the call. After everything that had happened, she didn't want to hear his voice. But as the phone continued to ring, she felt a pang of guilt. She had always answered his calls, always made herself available whenever he needed her. It was hard to break that habit, even though she knew she was doing the right thing by distancing herself. With a deep breath, Edith picked up the phone. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "Mom?" Peter's voice came through, sounding tired and worn. "It's me, Peter." Edith's grip tightened around the phone. She had braced herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to react. She had spent years putting up with Peter's demands, his never-ending requests for money and help, always with the promise that he would pay her back or make things right. But she had learned the hard way that those promises were nothing more than empty words. "Hi, Peter," Edith replied cautiously. "How have you been?" Peter's voice was laced with urgency. "Look, Mom, I've been going through some tough times. I know I've messed up a lot in the past, but I need your help again. I'm in a real bind this time. Please, I don't know who else to turn to." Edith closed her eyes, her heart sinking. She could hear the familiar desperation in Peter's voice, the same tone he had used countless times before. He was asking for her help again, just like he always had. But this time, something inside Edith snapped. She had been down this road too many times. She had given everything she had for him, and all he had done was take without ever truly changing. "I can't help you, Peter," Edith said, her voice firm. "I've already done more than enough. I've given you everything, and I can't keep doing this." Peter's tone shifted. "What do you mean? Mom, please, this is important. I need you. You're the only one who can help me." Edith felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. She realized with startling clarity that Peter had not changed. He hadn't learned from his mistakes. He was still the same man who used her, who took advantage of her kindness without ever thinking about the toll it took on her. He wasn't asking for help because he had changed. He was asking because he thought she would always be there to bail him out. He hadn't learned a thing. "I'm sorry, Peter," Edith said, her voice cold. "I can't keep enabling you. I've given you all I had, and it's time for me to live my own life now. I can't keep being the person you run to when things go wrong. You need to figure this out on your own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Edith could hear Peter's breathing become heavier. She knew what he was doing, trying to manipulate her, trying to make her feel guilty. But this time, Edith wasn't going to fall for it. "Mom, please," Peter said, his voice softening, trying a different approach. "You don't understand. I'm desperate." Edith shook her head, feeling the familiar weight of guilt creeping in. But she knew, deep down, that this was the right decision. She had to stop letting him use her. She had to stop letting him drain her, emotionally and financially. It was time for her to stand up for herself and refuse to be taken advantage of any longer. "I understand more than you think," Edith replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't my responsibility anymore. I've spent my whole life taking care of you. And now, it's time for me to take care of myself. Peter's voice broke, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. So that's it? You're just giving up on me? No, Edith said firmly. I'm not giving up on you. I'm giving up on letting you use me. I've done all I can, and now you need to do the rest. With that, Edith ended the call. Her hand shook as she placed the phone down, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. But as she sat there, she felt a strange sense of relief. She had made the right choice. For the first time in years, she felt free from the burden of Peter's demands. Her phone buzzed a few seconds later. It was another call from Peter. Edith didn't hesitate. She immediately pressed the button to block his number. She sat back in her chair, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. For so long, she had let Peter's needs define her life. But now, she was taking control. She was no longer going to allow his behavior to affect her happiness. As Edith sat quietly, reflecting on the phone call, she felt a sense of peace settle in. She had made a difficult decision, but it was the right one. It was time to put herself first, to stop living in the shadow of her family's needs, and to start living for the woman she had always been. Edith sat on the comfortable armchair in her apartment, the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. She had spent the morning going through the plans for the scholarship fund, her heart full of hope for the future. It was a new chapter for her, one where she would finally be able to contribute to something meaningful. For so long, her life had been centered around the needs of others. But now, for the first time, she was building something that would last, something that would reflect her true values. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Edith stood up quickly, a smile spreading across her face as she walked to answer it. When she opened the door, she was greeted by the familiar face of Mai, her granddaughter. Mai was standing there with a bright smile, holding a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she pulled Mai into a warm embrace. "Grandma, I've missed you so much," Mai said, her voice full of joy. "I'm so glad we could finally catch up." "I've missed you too, my dear," Edith replied, her voice soft with emotion. Come in. They sat down in the cozy living room, and Edith made tea for both of them. The two women settled into comfortable chairs, and for a moment they simply enjoyed each other's company, sharing the kind of quiet, unspoken connection that only time and love could create. "So, how have you been, Mai?" Edith asked, her eyes full of curiosity. She had watched her granddaughter grow into a strong, intelligent woman, and she was eager to hear about her life. Mai smiled and leaned back in her chair. "It's been a crazy few months. I've been juggling work, school, and trying to figure out what I really want out of life. But I'm doing well. I've been learning a lot, and I'm starting to feel like I'm finally getting a handle on things." Edith nodded, understanding the uncertainty that came with navigating adulthood. "I know that feeling. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? But you're strong, Mai. You always have been." Mai's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to take Edith's hand. "I've always looked up to you, Grandma. You've been through so much, and you've always kept going. You're the strongest person I know." Edith smiled warmly, touched by Mai's words. "Thank you, dear, but I've had my share of struggles, just like anyone else. The important thing is to keep moving forward, even when it feels like everything is falling apart." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they caught up on family news, but as the afternoon wore on, Mai became more serious. "Grandma, I've been thinking about something," she began. "You've been through so much in your life, and now that you're starting this scholarship fund, I just want to help. I want to help you make this dream a reality." Edith looked at her granddaughter, surprised by her offer. "What do you mean, Mai?" "I want to be part of this journey with you," Mai said, her voice filled with determination. "I've seen how much you've given to everyone else, and now I want to help you build something that will make a real difference. You've always supported me, and I want to do the same for you." Edith's eyes filled with tears as she listened to Mai's words. She had always been there for her family, sacrificing everything she had for them. But in that moment, she realized that it wasn't just about her giving anymore. It was about receiving, too. The love and support she had given to others had come full circle, and Mai's offer felt like a gift she had never expected. "You've always been my rock, Grandma," Mai continued. "You taught me that if you want to make a difference, you have to start by believing in yourself. And I believe in you. I believe in this scholarship fund. You can change the world, Grandma. You've already changed my life, and now you can change the lives of so many others." Edith felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years being the one who gave, never expecting anything in return. But now, for the first time in her life, she was being offered help to make a dream she had held on to for so long a reality. "I don't know what to say," Edith whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Say yes," Mai said, smiling brightly. "Let me help you. Let me help you build something that's bigger than both of us." Edith sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the love and support she felt in that moment. She had spent so much time in the shadows believing that her sacrifices were all she had to offer, but now she saw something else. She saw a future where she could continue to give, but this time she could give in a way that would honor her own journey. She didn't have to keep living in the past, trying to fix things for others. It was time to take her power back. With a smile, Edith took Mai's hand. "Yes, let's do this together." In that moment, Edith realized that she wasn't just building a scholarship fund. She was building a legacy of strength, love, and empowerment. And with Mai by her side, she knew that together they could make a difference. Edith's future was no longer defined by the sacrifices she had made in the past. It was defined by the opportunities she was creating for herself and for others. As the day drew to a close, Edith felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just living for others anymore. She was living for herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. Edith stood in front of the large, gleaming ballroom, the sound of soft music and murmurs of conversation filling the air. Mai was by her side, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Edith had always avoided events like these, preferring the quiet of her home, the routine of everyday life. But today, she was different. Today, she wasn't just a passive participant in the world. Today, she was part of something bigger. The event was a charity gala organized to raise funds for students from underprivileged backgrounds. The scholarship fund Edith had started was the driving force behind the event, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just watching life pass by. She was living it. Mai squeezed her hand. "Grandma, this is it. You're doing this. You're part of this." Edith smiled at her granddaughter, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She had come a long way since she had first decided to take control of her life. The past few weeks had been filled with new opportunities, new connections, and a renewed sense of purpose. She had stopped living for everyone else and started living for herself. And now, standing at the heart of this charity event, she realized that this was just the beginning. The guests mingled around the room, all dressed in elegant attire, but Edith no longer felt out of place. She had always thought she was too ordinary for these kinds of events, too focused on taking care of others to fit into a world of glamour and high society. But tonight, she wasn't ordinary. She was someone who had created something meaningful, someone who was now making a difference. The evening went on, with speeches from various donors and philanthropists, but Edith couldn't stop thinking about how far she had come. There was a time when she would have quietly sat in the background, letting others speak and take the spotlight. She would have been content just to be there, just to witness the success of others. But now, the thought of standing up and speaking in front of a room full of people didn't intimidate her. Instead, it filled her with excitement. She was ready to take her place in the world, not as a follower, but as a leader. As the evening drew to a close, the organizers of the event approached Edith. "Mrs. Foster," one of them said, a young woman with a warm smile, "we'd like to invite you to say a few words. You're the reason we're all here tonight, and we'd love for you to share a message with the guests." Edith was taken aback. Her first instinct was to decline, to remain in the background. But then, she remembered everything she had gone through to get to this point, the pain, the sacrifice, and the quiet resilience that had carried her through the years. She had worked hard for this moment. She had earned the right to stand at the front to speak her truth. With a steady breath, Edith stood up, her legs a little wobbly, but her heart strong. Mai gave her a supportive smile as she stepped to the front of the room, the spotlight now on her. The guests were all watching, waiting for her to speak. For a moment, Edith was silent, taking in the faces before her. She could feel the weight of their expectations, but she also felt something else. Empowerment. She wasn't just Edith the mother, Edith the grandmother. She was Edith, the woman who had built something beautiful, something that could change lives. "Good evening, everyone," Edith began, her voice steady. "I'm honored to be here with all of you tonight. This event, this scholarship fund, it means more to me than I can put into words. You see, for so many years, I gave everything I had to my family. I poured myself into them, believing that my worth was defined by what I could give. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I forgot to live for me." She paused, taking a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. She could see the faces of the students who would benefit from the scholarship, the people who were here because they believed in the same cause. And in that moment, Edith knew that this was where she belonged. "I've spent so much of my life in the shadows," Edith continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've always been the one who supported others, who gave without expecting anything in return. But tonight, I stand before you as someone who is finally learning to live for herself. I stand before you as a woman who believes that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to follow your dreams, to believe in yourself." A wave of emotion passed over Edith as she spoke, but she didn't let it stop her. She had spent too long hiding behind the expectations of others. It was time for her to step into the light. "I started this scholarship fund because I believe in the power of education. I believe in the power of opportunity. And I believe that every person deserves a chance to succeed, no matter their background or circumstances. But I also believe that we can't help others until we help ourselves. And that's what I've learned over the past few months. I've learned that I matter. My dreams matter, and so do yours." The room fell silent for a moment, and then, slowly, a round of applause began. Edith's heart swelled with pride. She had said what she needed to say, not just for the people in the room, but for herself. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for supporting this cause, and for helping to make this dream a reality," Edith said, her voice full of gratitude. "Together we can change lives. Together we can make the world a better place." With that, Edith stepped down from the podium, her heart racing with excitement. The applause continued, but she didn't hear it. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, the sound of a woman who had finally found her voice. As she walked back to Mai, she felt a sense of pride unlike anything she had ever experienced before. For so many years, she had lived in the background, waiting for someone to notice her. But tonight, Edith had taken her place at the front, not as a follower, but as a leader. And in that moment, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The days following the gala were filled with a sense of peace and anticipation that Edith had never known. It had been a week since she had stood up and spoken in front of the crowd, since she had finally taken control of her own life. Each day, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to continue building her scholarship fund and exploring the possibilities that lay ahead. As she sat in her favorite chair by the window, Edith reflected on her journey. It seemed impossible that just a few months ago she had been a woman who felt lost, a woman whose life had been dictated by the needs of others. Now, she was someone who made decisions for herself. She had come so far, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. She felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The weight of guilt and sacrifice that had weighed her down for so many years was gone. Edith had finally found her strength. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. The caller ID displayed Peter's name, and her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him since she had cut ties with him after the graduation incident. A mix of emotions flooded her: anger, fear, but also curiosity. What could he want now? Had he come to his senses, or was this just another attempt to manipulate her? With a deep breath, Edith picked up the phone. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but cautious. "Mom?" Peter's voice sounded strained, almost apologetic. "It's me. I know it's been a while, but I needed to call. I've been thinking a lot, and I owe you an apology." Edith's grip on the phone tightened. She had been expecting this moment, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure how to react. Peter had apologized before, only to revert to his old ways. She didn't want to fall into the trap again. "I'm listening," Edith said, her voice calm but firm. Peter took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I've messed up. I've been selfish and I haven't appreciated everything you've done for me. You've always been there for me and I took you for granted. I've been a terrible son and I'm sorry. I want to make things right, Mom. I want to try again. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm ready to start over, to fix things between us." Edith closed her eyes, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. Peter's words seemed sincere, but she had heard this before. The promises, the apologies, they always sounded good in the moment, but they never lasted. She had been patient for so long, forgiving him time and time again. But now she had to decide what was best for her. For the first time in her life, Edith didn't feel the overwhelming need to please him, to make him happy. She had spent years doing that, only to be left feeling empty. She had given everything to him, and in return she had received nothing but disappointment. But she was no longer that woman. She was someone who valued herself now, someone who understood that her happiness didn't depend on Peter's approval or his demands. "I appreciate your apology, Peter," Edith said, her voice steady and unwavering, "but I can't continue down the same path with you. I've done everything I can for you, but I've realized something. What I've been doing hasn't been helping you. It's only been enabling you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Peter's silence spoke volumes. He wasn't used to hearing her speak this way, wasn't used to her standing her ground. "I'm not going to keep letting you use me, Peter," Edith continued, her voice filled with conviction. "I've spent my whole life trying to fix things for you, but I can't do that anymore. You have to make your own choices now. I can't be the one to carry you anymore." Peter's voice cracked as he responded, "Mom, please, I've changed. I need you. Don't cut me out. I promise I'll do better." But Edith wasn't swayed. She had heard it all before. "I'm sorry, Peter," she said, her heart heavy but resolute. "I can't keep making excuses for you. You have to take responsibility for your own life. I can't keep being there for you if you're not willing to change. I've given everything I have, and now I need to live for myself." There was a long silence before Peter spoke again, his voice low and resigned. "I understand, Mom. I'm sorry. I hope one day you can forgive me." Edith felt a small pang of sadness, but she knew this was the right decision. She had to let go of the past and let Peter figure things out on his own. It wasn't easy, but she had to do it for herself. "I hope so too, Peter," Edith said quietly. "But this is the last time I'm going to let you back into my life without real change. Take care of yourself." With that, Edith hung up the phone, the finality of the conversation settling in. She wasn't angry. She didn't feel the bitterness that once consumed her. She just felt a deep sense of peace. She had made her decision. She had chosen herself. As she sat back in her chair, a sense of calm washed over her. She had been the one to hold everything together for so long. Now, for the first time, she was choosing to let go. Edith had spent too many years living for others, sacrificing her own happiness in the process. But no more. It was time to live for herself, to follow her own path and pursue the dreams she had put on hold for so long. The phone call from Peter had been a turning point, a final reminder that she couldn't keep looking backward. She had made the right decision, and for the first time in a long time, Edith felt free. She looked out the window at the setting sun, the world unfolding before her, and she smiled. This was the beginning of something new, a new chapter where she was no longer defined by the needs of others, but by her own desires, her own strength, and her own journey. Edith stood by the window of her small apartment, watching the soft light of dawn spill across the city. The air felt crisp and fresh, a perfect reflection of the new beginning she had decided to embrace. It had been weeks since she had made the decision to step into the future, to stop looking back at the years of sacrifice and missed opportunities. She no longer had time for regret. She was done with living in the shadows of others. Edith was no longer the quiet, invisible figure in the background. She was a woman who had chosen to live her life on her own terms. The journey she had started wasn't just about the scholarship fund. It was about reclaiming her own life. After years of putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own, she was finally learning to put herself first. She had spent so much time giving to others, trying to prove her worth through sacrifice, that she had forgotten to live for herself. But now, that had all changed. Edith felt stronger, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. As she sipped her morning tea, her thoughts turned to Mai. Her granddaughter, who had always been a source of light in her life, had become her greatest supporter. From the very beginning, Mai had believed in her vision for the scholarship fund. She had seen the potential in Edith when even Edith herself hadn't. Now, as they both worked toward this shared goal, Edith realized that Mai was no longer just a granddaughter. She was a partner, an equal in this journey. And the thought filled Edith with pride and gratitude. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Edith set down her cup of tea and walked to the door, opening it to find Mai standing there, a smile on her face and a look of determination in her eyes. "Good morning, Grandma," Mai said, stepping inside. "I've been thinking a lot about the fund, and I have some ideas I want to share with you." Edith smiled warmly, happy to see her granddaughter so enthusiastic. "Come in, dear. I was just thinking about you. Have a seat." As they sat down together, Mai quickly pulled out her laptop and began showing Edith the research she had done. She had looked into potential partnerships with local universities, as well as organizations that could help provide the students with mentorship and internships. Edith listened carefully, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Mai's passion and drive. She could see how far Mai had come, how much she had grown since Edith first started this journey. And she knew deep down that this scholarship fund was going to change lives, both the students who would benefit from it and their own. "Grandma," Mai said after a moment, "I've been thinking about something. We've come so far already, but I think we can do more. We can reach more people, make a bigger impact. What if we create an annual gala? A fundraiser where we can bring more people in, raise more money, and build even more awareness for the cause." Edith looked at her granddaughter, amazed by her drive. "That's a brilliant idea, Mai. I'm proud of you." Mai's face lit up with excitement. "We can involve the community, too. There are so many people who care about this cause and who would want to be a part of it. If we do this right, we can build something that lasts." Edith nodded, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a new chapter in her life. It was a new chapter in their lives. Together, they were going to make something meaningful. They were going to create a legacy, one that would outlive them both. And Edith knew it was exactly what she was meant to do. As the conversation continued, Edith couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had started this journey feeling lost, unsure of herself, and burdened by the weight of the past. But now, she was filled with a sense of purpose that gave her strength every day. She had chosen to move forward, to build something bigger than herself, and in doing so, she had found the freedom she had longed for. For the first time in a long time, Edith felt truly alive. Later that day, as Edith and Mai wrapped up their plans, Edith realized something important. She had been given the greatest gift of all, the chance to start over. The chance to live a life that wasn't defined by the needs of others, but by her own passions and desires. She had chosen this life, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running after something just to make others happy. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Edith's phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was an email from the foundation's website. The first round of donations for the scholarship fund had come in, and the response was overwhelming. Edith's heart raced as she scrolled through the message. They had already raised more money than she had ever hoped for. It was proof that her dream was becoming a reality. She turned to Mai, a smile on her face. "Look at this, Mai. We're really doing it. People care. They believe in this." Mai leaned over and looked at the email, her eyes widening. "This is amazing, Grandma. It's only the beginning." Edith nodded, her eyes shining with determination. She wasn't just making a difference in the lives of these students. She was making a difference in her own life. She had spent so many years feeling as though she wasn't enough, as though her worth was tied to what she could give to others. But now she was living for herself, for the things that mattered most to her. "I never thought I'd be here, Mai," Edith said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I spent so many years thinking I was invisible, but now I can see it. I can see the future, and it's mine to create." Mai smiled warmly at her grandmother. "You've always been strong, Grandma. I'm just glad I get to be here with you as you make your dreams come true." Edith squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with love. "We're doing this together, Mai, and I can't wait to see where it takes us." As Edith looked out the window once again, she saw the world in a new light. The future was bright, and it was hers to shape.